Go on, Mary.
Venerable Robina Courtin is leading the new series for the month of February, the Be Your Own Therapist series on Fridays from 5 to 6 p.m. Mountain Time for the next 4 weeks. And Venerable Robina, she's been ordained since the late 1970s, and Venerable Robina has worked full-time since then for Lama Thipten Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's FPMT. Over the years, she has served as the editorial director of Wisdom Publications, editor of Mandala Magazine, executive director of Liberation Prison Project, and as a touring teacher of Buddhism. Her life and work with prisoners has been featured in documentary films Chasing Buddha and Key to Freedom.
Thank you, Mary. And I'm an old fan of Nobiling in Santa Fe since 20 years now. Okay, when I was living in Taos, I used to go up to Santa Fe once a week. That was when Ajahn was the director. Happy to be here still. So, darling people, we think we're going to be together for this little hour to think about, analyze, contemplate, internalize, if we choose to, this advice coming from the Buddha through the lineage of the Indians to the Tibetans to us modern people, Australians and Americans and all the rest. And what it's all about is really, I mean, be your own therapist sounds like a nice idea, and it's really true. It's the essence of being a Buddhist, actually, knowing your own mind intimately, knowing the contents of our mind, so that we can learn to know what causes us happiness and what causes us suffering in the mind, and to know that we can be in charge of it. That's really the essential point is that. So we're going to listen, think about, analyze, and if there's anything useful, we'll put it into practice. Why should we do this? Because the Buddha's view is what goes on in our mind is the main source of our suffering and happiness. I mean, the words are so simple, but really hard to hear because we think the exact opposite. We think that outside world is the main cause of our happiness and suffering. But this is the point that Buddha's making. So that's the reason to work on our minds. It's the reason to be our own therapist. It's not religious, it's practical psychology. So it's not only for our sake, it's for also the sake of others, because we live in this crazy world together, don't we? That's it, you know. So we think we're going to listen for this reason, to put ourselves together as, you know, we're a work in progress, thinking like that. And as Lama Zopa Rinpoche puts it, we can mold our minds into any shape we like. So yeah, what to think about, what to talk about. These words sound simple enough, you know. It's very interesting. The words sound really simple. They're not complicated. It's really not a complicated idea, but it's hard to hear it. We should look at why it's hard to hear it. Because, and the reason is because we totally, at the level of assumption, we totally believe that somehow, I think we feel there's no choice about what's in our mind. We think that whatever arises, it's there, and this is who I am, and we're stuck with it. Somehow, that, I think, apart from the fact that we think everything outside and the outside world is a source of our happiness and suffering, apart from that, we totally believe that. But it's because whatever arises in our mind, especially the unhappy stuff, when it comes up, this is why we despair, you know, when let's say you have a habit to be angry, or habit to be depressed, habit to be jealous, habit to have low self-esteem, these unhappy states of mind. Then we just assume, because they arise, and that we don't seem to choose to think this way, and it just seems to pop up. Then the assumption is, this is who I am, this is me. And we become completely hopeless, you know. So then secondly, when even if we do think, well, you mean I can change my anger? You mean I can change my depression? So then, even when we hear that, why it's so difficult to hear it properly is because, and this is the point, is because our tragedy is this is really the key thing, I think, in our culture. We don't notice what is happening in our mind until it's emotional. In fact, when we think of the mind, and generally in our daily lives, we think of emotion, we point to the heart. And then we think of thoughts. And even when we say the word mind, we don't tend to think emotional. We think emotion is a whole different kind of kettle of fish down here somewhere. And up here is kind of rational and intelligent and clear and thoughts, you know. Well, the Buddha's deal is that the word mind, covers all of that. You know, the word mind, or in fact, the word consciousness, they refer to the same thing. They refer to whatever goes on inside us, all the thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, so-called negative, so-called positive, angry, loving, compassionate, intelligent, thoughts about theories about music. All of this is thoughts, and it's all our mind. But it happens to be that some parts of us, because it's all thoughts. This is the part that's surprising. It's all thoughts, but because some of these thoughts are so habitual, and of course, Buddha's not just talking about this life. He says we come into this life literally programmed with so much of what goes on in our mind. We don't get it from our mummy and daddy, and we don't get it from God or Buddha. We bring it with our own mind. This is Buddha's key point, which of course is quite a shock to us as well, which implies this business of reincarnation. But just showing the depth of it, actually, that we come programmed into this mind at the first second of conception. And so we know, I find this is a very fascinating point. We know we can change our mind when it comes to theories like music. Let's say you've never heard of musical theory, but you like music, you decide to learn music. Well, you know perfectly well, you can't just go play the piano. You've got to sit in the class and learn all these theories. You know, it's a traditional way to learn, isn't it? You learn lots of theoretic theories. And what are theories? They're thoughts. You know, you learn all about B major and F flat and all the complicated theories of, let's say, music, classical music, let's say. That's thoughts, isn't it? Then if you want to learn math, you might never have heard of maths, and then you decide you're going to learn math, and you don't even know, you've never heard of even 1 + 1, but you learn it. This is my point. It's thoughts. 1 + 1 is a thought, and you know it equals 2, and then you learn it and you memorize it until eventually it becomes experiential. So we know we can change our mind from not knowing mathematical thoughts to being very familiar with mathematical thoughts to the point where we become a mathematician. So we know it's possible. We know we can turn our mind into a genius. We know we can mold our mind into a genius musician, a genius mathematician, a genius cook. That is not our problem. We know that. We know we can do that. The part that we don't know, and it's surprising to us, is we can change the thoughts, and I'm saying these words very carefully, the thoughts that underpin our emotions. And why is because we don't notice what's happening in our mind until it becomes emotional. That means you don't know you're angry until the words are vomiting out your mouth. You don't know you're depressed until you can't get out of bed one morning because you're inert. You don't know you're jealous until your heart is beating and you're freaking out. And that's how, and we assume that's what we say is normal. Well, it is normal insofar as we're all like it. But all the Buddha's saying is, well, you know what, honeys, you can learn. This is why concentration, meditation, these simple, practical mindfulness techniques come in that are so powerfully beneficial. We can learn to become familiar, to become aware of what we are thinking at a more subtle level. Or another way to put it, we can learn to become aware of the thought processes that underpin the emotions, because that's the point that Buddha's making, that we live at the level of conceptuality. There's a whole theoretical presentation of the mind. In the Buddha's view, we have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. So when it comes to mental consciousness, as Lama Zopa says, that's where the workshop is. That's where all the thoughts and feelings and theories and philosophy and psychology and explanations and music and love and compassion and craziness and rage, that's where all that is. And the level it functions at is thoughts, conceptual thoughts. So, and that's surprising to us, to think that anger is a conceptual thought sounds like a joke. When you see a person screaming, that spit coming out their mouth, they're shouting, they're yelling, like I say, adult or child, and you say that they're having a series of thoughts, that sounds like a joke, but analyze it. It's completely correct. What you're seeing is a person shouting, yelling, and flailing, and tears coming out of their eyes and spit coming out their mouth, and they're jumping and screaming. So what you're seeing is a body very agitated. You're hearing speech that's screaming very loud. And if you listen to the quality of the speech, it's irrational, it's extreme. We know that. But analyze What is speech? Speech expresses what's in the mind. You wouldn't say, I hate you, the cause of all my suffering, if you weren't thinking it. So speech is simply expressing thoughts. That's what anger is. That's what love is. That's what compassion is, except that it's got an emotional component, which is when the body is involved. So what we have, the Buddha's expertise is learning to become familiar with the thoughts, but at an ever more subtle level, at levels of subtlety that we don't even posit as existing in our neuroscientific psychological models. And this is a fact. So we know ourselves, we go to the therapist and she helps us start to unpack our emotions. What we're going to be doing is talking. What's talking? Talking is thoughts. We start to hear what we are thinking. We go beneath the emotional component and begin to hear the thought processes, the conceptual stories. We understand this when we lay it out like this. But because because this is the Buddha's point really, because the angry thoughts are so habitual. I mean, when I was a little girl, my mother didn't have to teach me to be angry. I knew how. That means it was a habit. And so, of course, when we understand that anger is the response when my attachment doesn't get what it wants, this is a whole, discussion, the Buddha's view of the mind. And because and we have to assume I'd practiced these angry thoughts so often that then the second my attachment didn't get what it wanted, then out of my mouth came these angry words and shouting and yelling. So the key thing is to know that the emotions, which is when the body is involved, is the tip that are the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. But we somehow give power, somehow, and I'm not being critical here, to the emotions and indeed to the body. And because we know anger feels terrible. We know jealousy feels unbearable. We know anxiety is unbearable. We know it's physically and emotionally unbearable, all these terrible things. We know that. But that's at the grossest level, the emotional level. And we don't pay attention until the emotional level. So the Buddha's view is, we can learn to pay attention. So that slowly, and I'm talking days, weeks, months, years of hard work, slowly, we can become familiar with the thought processes, the conceptual stories going on in our mind all the time. And notice them before they vomit out the mouth. Notice them before you become so depressed you can't move. That's the skill that Buddha teaches us. And these words are not complicated, but it's a revelation to us, So the first thing is, just now in Facebook or one of those, not Facebook, what's it called? One of the Facebook, maybe Instagram, somebody, sometimes people ask the questions. I put these videos out and people ask questions. Why should I change my mind? Like I was a surprise to somebody. And that's a very common thought. Why should I change my mind? And that's a really good question. Because Buddha says that what goes on in your mind is why you suffer or happy. So it's a question whether you want to be happy or not. If you want to be happy, which means feel good, putting it very simply, then the Buddha says, guess what, folks? And this again is a shock to us, that what our thoughts and feelings and emotions are the source of my happiness and suffering. The external world obviously plays a role. If my boyfriend leaves me, that's an obvious event that triggers lots of emotions inside me. But the Buddha's saying, and this is the other part that's shocking, that the boyfriend leaving me isn't the main event. This is so shocking to us. It really almost, we can't even hear it, This is the Buddha's analysis. And where's this coming from? He didn't just make this up. He's not trying to be punitive. He's simply saying this is his experience, that he has found that what goes on in our thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious and the feelings and emotions, what goes on there, all that, they're the main player. My thoughts and feelings and emotions are the main player, the main in my happiness and suffering. So these words aren't complicated, but they're so shocking to us. Even if we're Buddhists and been practicing for years, it's still shocking to hear this. Because the first thing we think is, well, what do you mean I should change my thoughts? My boyfriend left me. I'm allowed to be jealous. This is a really powerful point. We say that. Like as if when Buddha is suggesting that we can stop being angry and jealous, like as if he's being punitive and heavy. What do you mean I should stop being angry? Look what he did to me. And this is very real. We feel that. So real, so real. And you're right. Is wrong what he did. No argument. There's no argument. The Buddha says if we can change something, so if you can stop the boyfriend leaving you and get him to come back again, well then great. You've solved the problem. But what if you can't? That's when practice really starts, you know. But better to start before he leaves you, then you're ready for it. That's not being cynical. I mean, we know bad things happen, you know. I mean, just now, I was yesterday in Miami because the brother of a woman I met, he was, you might have read the story, Pablo Lyle. Did you read about that one? This Mexican actor. And he's back in America, came to visit a few years ago, his sister in Miami. And then suddenly there's something, road rage, and the guy he punched died. So now he's lost all his life, and he finally got sentenced yesterday. So all of a sudden he wasn't expecting this, you know. He was a good human being with his kids and his wife. He had a career. He's a well-known actor. And then suddenly some few seconds event happens and someone dies. No one expects that. No one plans that. So the trauma and the shock you have to go through to deal with this complete change. And the thing is, we all know your life can be going fine, but we don't expect bad things to happen. It's because we don't want bad things to happen. So don't wait for the bad things to happen. Really, Buddha's point is, don't wait for the bad things to happen to work on our mind. And this is why I can see that with my friends in prison, you know. Many people go completely crazy because they don't know how to deal with this radical shift in their life, and they've suddenly been accused, especially if you're innocent, even more traumatic. So this is our problem. I think what I'm saying in our culture, you know, like I say, and it's true, we only go to the therapist when you practically want to kill your husband, when the anger is so strong, when you're so exhausted from it, when your jealousy is so bad, you're so distressed. I mean, I joke and I mean it seriously, though. If you go to your therapist and you say you got slightly annoyed today because your hubby slurps his coffee, she would laugh at you and tell you to go back home and wait till you want to kill him before you come and waste her time. I mean, I'm sort of joking, but I'm not joking. But the Buddha's deal is exactly right. In other words, I say this again, and I really mean it, in our culture, we don't have preventative methods when it comes to our mind. But we have lots of preventative methods when it comes to our body. We don't wait till the teeth fall out before we go to the dentist. We prevent things. We don't wait till, you know, we might, but we don't wait till the wheels fall off our car before we go to the mechanic. I mean, this is a really serious point. It's like a joke. But when it comes to our mind, we don't have techniques like that because we just take it for granted that whatever's in there is in there. That's just who I am. This is just who I am. What to do, you know? This is the way life is. And that's nihilistic. So learning to become familiar with what is going on in our mind, which is pretty intense because it's like even Western psychology said there's 1,000 thoughts a second. It's not a joke. It's a pretty intense job to do. It's a lifelong job. And the degree to which we can become familiar, as I said before, is so shocking because Buddha's view of the mind goes to way subtler levels than we ever would imagine in the modern views. So, and the benefit of it is because then, you know, it's not as if you're kind of preparing for the worst, but in a sense, you're learning to see your mind and to know. Then we can learn to navigate the mind. We can learn to change the way we understand things, change the way we interpret things, which means lessen attachment and lessen anger and lessen the jealousy and lessen the depression slowly, 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 slowly. So then whether your hubby never leaves you, you become happy anyway. And if he does leave you, you're still happy. This is the point. And this is the point, that we can learn, as Lama Yeshe puts it, to be our own therapist. As Lama Zopa puts it, we can mold our mind. into any shape we like. And the shape we're trying to say here, and the one the Buddha's found, is that we can mold our mind into a happy, wise, content, fulfilled, compassionate person. I mean, who doesn't want that? But we tend to think it's like a bit hit and miss. As long as you get the nice boyfriend and the nice cake and the nice money and the nice weather, then I'll be happy. So that's, I mean, the Buddha says, no, don't be ridiculous. It's nice to have the nice weather and a nice boyfriend. They're a bonus. But what's in your mind, your thoughts, which are interpretations, which become emotionally based, they are the source of your happiness and suffering. This is the essence of it. The words are not complicated. But to do the job, oh my goodness, it just takes time. But once we start the job, then you can get some confidence, you know, you become braver. We become braver. And of course, the first thing we think when we hear this approach of the Buddhas, it's like we hear it as blame. Because, you know, the world is terrible. Terrible things happen to people. There's terrible injustice, terrible suffering, terrible sexism, terrible racism, terrible things happen, terrible injustices. And of course, Buddha's got a whole explanation of all of that. That's called karma. We're not even discussing that here. We're not even discussing that here. In other words, given that the world can be pretty terrible, given that terrible things can happen, Buddha's approach is, given that terrible things do happen and might happen to you, and you don't know when. I mean, this guy, Pablo, had no expectation of suddenly losing his job and going to prison. It's happened so common, so shocking. Given that terrible things can happen, and it's not being nihilistic or depressing, let's look at the world and we can see it's true, then why not have the mind to be more stable and steady and able to handle it? I mean, it seems to me in our culture, we're brilliant at learning techniques. We'll learn how to drive. You don't just cross your fingers and hope that one day, you might be forced to have to drive, in which case I'll do the best I can at the time. No, you won't. You'll be a disaster. So why not learn driving now? You can learn to count. You can learn to walk. You can do all these things that enable us to live our life. So Buddha says we can also work on our mind, which means work on our emotions, which means become familiar with what's there, which means label them accurately, and then begin slowly to listen to the conceptual story that underpins that emotion. So let's discuss that. Let's look at that. So what's the conceptual story that underpins anger? Listen to it. I mean, it's easy enough to say it. What is anger saying? If you're screaming out your mouth, shaking with anger, what you're saying is a variation of, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. You are the cause of my suffering. I did not do that. You did that. I mean, it's just desperate, But the key energy, I think, behind anger is this shock. How dare you do that to me? How dare you do that? If someone's mean to us, let's say. This horror, this awful feeling of this terrible injustice, We know that so well. The pain of it is incredible, Screaming and crying, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. I mean, this sounds kind of shocking, quite heavy for us, but let's analyze. This is really, now I think I have to bring karma in here because it's so integrated into Buddha's view, analysis of the world, it's very fascinating. So, like very simple. Something wrong happens and I get angry, especially when it's very personal. Someone harms me. So when I'm saying, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. The outrage of that is quite powerful, isn't it? And the fact is the person might well have done something wrong, like steal your money, punch you in the nose, whatever. So the shock of it is quite heavy for us. But the feeling of I don't deserve it is really a powerful concept. And that somehow is quite hard to analyze unless, so okay, the framework we'll use here to analyze it is the framework of karma, which is Buddha's analysis of the world. The view of karma, the law of karma for the Buddha, the law of cause and effect when it comes to happiness and suffering. The law of cause and effect we all know about. Botany is the law of cause and effect. Mathematics is the law of cause and effect. We know well the law of cause and effect in relation to all the day-to-day life of things that we're so good at. You learn the recipe, you learn the theory, and then you do the thing and you'll get the result every time. That's called cause and effect. We get that. So the Buddha's expertise is cause and effect in relation to happiness and suffering. Why is there suffering and why is there happiness? And the law is the same for both. And that's why he uses a lot the analogy of seeds and fruits. So, the law of karma is like the law of botany. You've got things growing in the garden. So if you don't know botany, then you don't know the answer to the question, what is that and why it's there? So if you want to learn about a garden, you got to learn to know what's there. There's a weed and there's a herb, let's say. So you have to know what a weed is and know the cause of a weed, and you know what a herb is, and you know the cause of a herb, and you don't want a weed and you do want a herb. You've got to state that. So we don't want suffering and we do want happiness. We don't want bad things to happen, speaking simply, and we do want good things to happen. So the Buddha's telling us that, in a sense, our life is our garden. This is his view, that we, like I said before, we come into this life programmed with our own tendencies. This is the radical difference in Buddhism. You didn't get made by God, and you didn't by a creator, and you don't get made. And Buddha certainly isn't a creator, and you don't get made by your parents. They give you a body, yes, but the Buddha's view is your consciousness, your mind is not physical, and all your tendencies, all your good and your bad and your love and your compassion, your kindness, whatever, are all your mind, and they're yours. This is the major point in Buddhism. This is a major, crucial point. And then this continuity of consciousness, it left a previous body not more than a few weeks before you found your way to your mother's fallopian tube, and you came programmed with your habits, basically. I mean, that concept's not so complicated, just it's quite different, that's all. We think we come into this, and this is a big difference, we think we come into this life programmed with our mummies and daddies' habits. And if that's true, then I agree with you. They are very naughty, giving you bad habits. How dare they do that? I agree. That's pretty shocking. But the Buddha says they didn't. They gave you a body, honey. They didn't give you habits. You brought your habits with you. So then not only that, there are 4 ways that karma ripens. The Buddha says everything we think and do and say, everything that any sentient being thinks and does and says, every millisecond of what any sentient being thinks and does and says, just naturally is this process of sowing seeds. And then of experiencing the fruits of past seeds. So each second we're sowing seeds that will produce future fruits, and each second we're experiencing fruits that are the fruits of the past seeds. This is the way Buddhism would say it. It's a very dynamic process. So there are 4 ways that our karma ripens. One is the type of rebirth. So we got a human body. Well, it's like we won the lottery. It's so incredible to get a human body, the Buddha would say. There's only 7 billion of us. Look at the number of animals, and creatures and bugs and mosquitoes. Trillions. Uncountable numbers. So obviously harder to get a human body. Then that's the first way your karma ripens. You get a human mummy. We got a human mummy. We created the cause for that by past non-killing. Second, within that body, you have a mind, don't you? And the tendencies in your mind, they're the second way your past karma ripens. So we all can see the world is full of anything between Hitler and Mother Teresa, isn't it? Kind of the 2 extremes. So we can see we've got lots of tendencies, mental tendencies. Since we're little, we can see that. Good at music, good at math, good at football, good at laziness, good at killing, good at lying, good at stealing. Habits, in other words, habits. And because, especially the negative ones, when they're strong habits, they overwhelm us completely, and we just assume this is my nature and I can't change what to do. This is who I am. It's very tragic. So the tendencies is the second way our karma ripens, and they come from our own past practice. This is the major point, because if they do come from mother and father, it's quite hard to take responsibility for them, isn't it? Well, it's not my fault. I didn't ask to get born. It's my mother's fault, my father's fault. This is reasonable if you think they gave you anger and love and compassion. No, they didn't. You brought them with you. This is a major point in Buddhism. Now, the third way, and this is the part that's difficult, the third way that karma ripens is it's the stuff that happens to you. So the stuff that you do and think, and then the stuff that happens to you. So that's where, let's say, this relationship, there's a dynamic. We've got a strong connection with lots of people. We're very social beings, aren't we? You know, someone comes along and gives you a nice gift. And this is an interesting point about that. When you get a lovely gift, we're so moved and delighted. We're so moved by it and delighted because it's surprising to us. You know, it's like you didn't expect it. So why don't we say, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve that. Ask the question. Because the fact is, you didn't do anything to deserve it. It's like a surprise, wasn't it? You're just standing there, or like someone does something nice to you. Like on the subway recently, this lady across from the other side handed me her shopping. She gave me her shopping bag of food. Don't ask me why. Amazing. So imagine if I said to her, excuse me, how dare you give that? I don't deserve that. We don't get shocked. We might feel a bit embarrassed and you don't deserve it. But how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve that. Why? You've got to ask the question, why don't we say that? Because we think the opposite. In a sense, you're kind of surprised and rather delighted. I was amazed and delighted, you know. But actually, in a sense, when I've got a relationship with a boyfriend, let's say I've got a relationship with a boyfriend, what's working here is attachment. And attachment very strongly actually believes that I only deserve good things. We never say it so bluntly. It's like it's at the level of assumption. Attachment is this assumption that I only deserve good things. And then when you get the good things, we're kind of delighted, but we kind of assume it's our right. Think about this. We assume it's our right. We're not surprised. Now, when the bad thing happens, why the shock? How dare you do that? I don't deserve that. But let's look at this deserve, because we say deserve. We put it like that. Attachment believes I only deserve the good. And when you get the good, you're not shocked. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve that. You assume you do deserve it. And give me more, please, while you're at it, if you can. That's attachment. And then when the bad thing happens, we're shocked. I don't deserve. Now, the word deserve is the key word here. It's very fascinating. It's really fascinating, the word deserve. We say it like that. Let's analyze it. You know very well, if you have a bank account, when you look in the bank account and you see no dollars there, you will never say, how dare there are no dollars in my bank account? I deserve dollars. And so why wouldn't you say that? It's because it's your bank account. And you know that it is your responsibility, that bank account is your responsibility, and whatever's in it is what you put there. And if it's not there, that means you didn't put it there. So there's no concept of how dare there be no dollars? I deserve dollars. So what that means is if you say, how dare there be no dollars? I deserve dollars. The assumption is someone else should be giving you dollars. But you know it's nobody else's job to put dollars. And that's ownership. So you own the bank account and you accept responsibility. There's no dollars in there. You must have spent a lot. There's a really powerful point. The same with your garden. You don't look in your garden and see weeds and go, who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. Because you would never say that, because you know it's your garden. And if weeds are there, it's because you allow them to grow. And if there are flowers there, you must have put them there. So in other words, with the garden and the bank, we know, in a sense, we get what we deserve. Not heavily, reasonable. You deserve the flowers because you put them there. You grew them. So own them, please. And you deserve the weeds because you let them grow. So you own what's in there. This is the essence of the approach to karma, you know. But the view we have about ourselves, this is a philosophical materialist view, that someone else put you on this planet. I find this a really powerful concept philosophically. And we all just assume it's true. I mean, if really and truly we can prove that if we can prove the Buddha's wrong, it's fine, prove it. We have to prove it, you know. If we can prove the Buddha's wrong, that you bring your own stuff with you and that you create the cause to meet friends and enemies and strangers and have bad things and good things happen to you because you're the creator of your own reality. If that's true, if we can prove he's wrong and that the materialists are right, it's not being rude or anything, it's just analyzing, and that your mother and father actually are the creators of you, which means they gave you depression and they gave you anger and they gave you kindness, whatever. If we can prove that's true, then it's true that it's just luck, and not luck that you just didn't ask to get born and it is not your fault. I would agree with you. It is not your fault. I would agree. But the deserve one is not based on anything. So why does attachment think I deserve only the good things? And why does anger think I don't deserve bad? Where do we get that concept from? We've made it up, Buddha says. Because deserving something, you have to be connected to it. You have to have a relationship with something. You know, that bank, you deserve dollars in that bank if you put them there. You deserve flowers in that garden if you put them there. You create the cause to get the flowers. You create the cause to get so then in that sense, you deserve them. Absolutely, you do. But the way attachment and aversion think, we're like this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born, who plonked on this earth, and somehow we just deserve good things. There's no logic to that. You have to create, you have to deserve something. You have to do something to get it. To deserve, to get flowers in your garden, to deserve flowers, in other words, using our word, deserve, is quite heavy. You have to put the seeds in. You can't just say, I deserve flowers. Who's going to put them in there? It's your garden. You've got to put them there. And that's of your karma. We're not this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. We're not the handiwork of a creator or mummy or daddy. This is such a powerful point, actually. It's quite shocking to us because it's how we feel. So this view is so shocking and so profound that we can learn to work with it. You know, if you work with the view of karma, I found myself personally trying my best. It's tremendous the effect that it can have on your life, because slowly you own responsibility for everything in your life, because your life is your garden and you sowed the seeds. Now we are reaping the fruits. I mean, it's a massive idea, actually. It's quite a shocking idea, actually. And of course, initially, we can't prove it's to be true. We're not clairvoyant. But Buddha's telling us from his own observation, this is the way it is. He's presenting his findings. It's up to us to prove it by practicing slowly, slowly. And eventually we will see the truth of this or not. And as the Dalai Lama says, if we can prove Buddha to be wrong, well, of course, you must reject him at some point, you know. So, but philosophically, psychologically, it's quite powerful to think this concept of deserve. And we use it very, very strongly. It's the source of our pain, you know. Which is why even a person in the street looks mean at you. The pain of it. How dare she do that? I don't deserve it. I don't deserve is the feeling that we have of anger, you know, hurt. When someone hurts us, it's so painful. And ego is saying, I don't deserve it. It's a very powerful concept. And it's utterly spontaneous, practiced to perfection, you know. And it's got deserve is a heavy kind of sounding thing. We use it in a heavy way, don't we? Because that's where we flip it over, and then we think karma, oh, well, you know, I created the cause to have this suffering. Well, then you deserve it, Robina, then put up with it and suffer, because it's heavy for us. The word deserve is heavy for us, you know. It's heavy. There's no concept like that really here. So if you have this sense that you brought into this life your own tendencies, you created the cause to have that mummy and daddy, you created the cause to have all the good things that happen. And this is what's interesting when we come to karma, we only tend to think of it when it's the bad things. It's very fascinating. One bad thing can happen in your life. One thing in today, let's say. 1,000 other good things have all happened. You got a meal, someone smiled at you, the sun was shining, you got out of bed, you have a house, you have a mattress, you have food, but we just take it for granted. We take the good for granted. Why? Because attachment assumes I deserve it, so you better keep giving it to me. We greedily kind of take the good and don't question it. Well, I deserve it, so give me more. That's how we think. But when the bad things happen, we have a mental breakdown, freaks us out. So this is not meant to be punitive. This is simply describing the Buddhist psychological view of why we suffer. Because of attachment and aversion. These words are so simple, but the analysis of it is so profound, And they're the main voices of ego. So slowly working psychologically with this view of karma, and like I like to say, using it as your working hypothesis until you're clairvoyant and quite advanced. You're not going to prove it to be true, but you take it as your working hypothesis until then, and slowly try to apply it. What it does is it causes us to become less victim-minded, more brave, more able to own our experiences, both the good and the bad. Less victim, less blaming, less resentful, less attached, less angry, less jealous, more courageous, more content, and therefore more compassionate. This is the way it works, but it takes time. So I think it's about time you asked me some questions. I've been talking nonstop for 40 minutes. I'm sorry. Come on, there's a whole bunch of things I've just said. So ask some questions. Please. Yes. Who would like to talk? Mary?
Does anyone have a question for Venerable Robina?
Any old question, I don't mind. Doesn't matter. Any old discussion point.
Gonzalo.
Yes. Zalo, talk to me.
Hello, Venerable Robina.
Hello, darling.
Thank you very much for your teachings. I'm
Yes.
sorry that my camera is not on, but it's not working very good.
Okay, sure. Talk to me.
So when something bad happens, does it make sense to somehow be happy because you're kind of purifying a karma?
I understand. Of course, that's the ideal, isn't it? So that's where the analogy, let's say, of that's the way for sure. But that's a more, in a sense, a more advanced level. If we're still so programmed, which we all are, with the instinct of ego to be shocked when a bad thing happens and feel terrible pain, and to be happy when good things happen and take it for granted, if we're still at that level, the very first level of practice is at least apply the view of karma and try to understand that that's why it's happening. It doesn't work well immediately because we're so addicted to the other view, but eventually, as we become more habituated with the view of karma, yes, we can learn to not be so freaked out when bad things happen. And we know we've just used up, because technically, it's like a garden. The analogy is a garden. If you discover a weed in your garden that you didn't realize was there, which is like the analogy of anger, then first of all, you're glad you see it, and you're glad now you have the opportunity to pull it out. So then you're happy to pull it out. So the same with the anger, when it arises, it's the fruit of a seed. And so now having it just ripened as that unhappy experience, but now you're glad because that seed has now finished. That's the way to think about it, technically, So of course, eventually at the bodhisattva level, they're so happy to have bad things because you're using it all up. You're getting rid of it all, You're getting rid of it all. Like every time a seed ripens, then you finish that seed, isn't it? So that is the attitude, absolutely, but it takes time.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Who else? Something else? Something else? Somebody?
Renee has a question. You can unmute, Renee.
Good, Renee. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Thank you. So I'm a baby at all of this. And
Okay.
so one of my questions is attainment attachment something that we should not desire? Is that?
Well, I understand, yeah. Exactly. So, but the important thing is, of course, we need to really be clear the Buddhist analysis of what attachment is, because the way we use that word in our culture is very, very different. So that's why it can initially sound quite depressing, because we mix attachment with the say the word, even with love, for example, being close to somebody, or we mix it with happiness. So to hear that we have to give that up makes us very depressed. So we've got to understand this very specific approach in Buddhist psychology, where he distinguishes very clearly between neurotic, painful, unhappy states of mind and positive, virtuous, productive, useful states of mind. And in one sense, we kind of know that. I mean, in other words, if you said love and compassion and kindness, you'd think they sound good. And if you say anger, jealousy, and depression, you say, oh, I don't want those. We kind of know, you know. And so the Buddha makes a really clear distinction between these. And he's not trying to sound punitive or criticizing us, but he's just telling us that the negative ones make us suffer and the positive ones make us happy. So we have to try and change. So now the point about attachment is, this is one of the, he says effectively that's the main cause of our suffering in day-to-day life. So if that's true, we'd really better know what he means by it. So what it is, it's not love. Love is a delight in someone else's being happy, or happy. It's not happiness. That's something else. And that's not lovely to be happy. But what attachment is, and it's very deep inside us, and it mixes with all the good stuff. It's a very deep, it's a very powerful kind of emotional hunger that kind of feels I'm never enough, never have enough, always craving for something more. And it can be quite subtle, and it can be quite gross. Like you can be an alcoholic or a junkie or eat too much food, or it can be more subtle than that. But it's this emotional hunger that causes us to always feel we don't have enough and is always wanting something more. That's one way of describing it. And it can be very subtle and quite gross. And so it's also at the level of assumption, as I said before. It's an assumption that I only want the nice things. And so attachment is like a bit like a fragile child. It can only cope with the nice things. It can't stand problems. So the moment attachment doesn't get what it wants, that's what anger is: aversion, upset, irritated, mild levels or very gross levels. So we run between this attachment and this aversion like 1,000 times a day, is the way Buddha's saying it. And these are simple words, but they go to quite subtle level to really see these. So attachment is, Buddha says, this constant emotional hunger that I'm never enough and don't have enough. He says a complete mistake. In fact, it's the symptom of a really suffering person. And so especially when we dump it on food and and people and boyfriends and weather, and never feel we've got enough, and always think we have to get this and get that and get this, and it's never ending and it's never satisfied. And so we search from pillar to post. And he says, the Buddha's saying, more than that, better than that, we have to learn to notice the attachment. And one of the jobs is to learn to be satisfied with what we are, learn to become more fulfilled in ourself, is one of the consequences of trying to give up this attachment, to see it. But it's quite subtle. It goes to quite subtle levels, you know. Do you understand?
I do. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Renee. Thank you, sweetheart. Yes, Mary.
Okay, there's a question in chat.
Sure.
Please, can you ask Venerable, if I laugh at a Sangha member behind their back because they remind me of a cute hamster, but I don't mean it nasty way, what kind of karma am I creating? Will I be reborn as a hamster? Will I go to hell?
I don't know who that person is. Sweetheart, listen, I mean, you know, the Buddha's view is every thought counts. Every word we say has meaning. So, you know, it's best not to joke about things, but I mean, I can't imagine it's the worst thing you've ever said or done. So don't worry about it too much. Come on. Next question. Someone else? No? Any old question? Anything at all, people? Come on, we've got 12 minutes to go. Let's make the most. If there's not, I'm fine. Yeah. Oh, okay, good. Andy, talk to me.
Hi, Venerable Robina. Thank you very much.
Good,
I feel like there are sometimes that my ego is working in a way that it keeps feeding the doubt.
Doubt.
And yeah, doubt.
In what sense?
And so I think about the ways I was raised Catholic,
Yeah.
and you know, early on had this feeling like I didn't believe in like a creator or a God that was interceding.
Sure.
But then with learning about certain parts of Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism,
Yes.
I hear things about guru devotion or how Tara might intercede,
Mhm.
and then I could tell, my mind is questioning in order
Oh,
to feed the doubt, but
yeah.
I have a difficult time of how to work with that without jumping to these great people who I look up to believe this could work or this works this way, and then I have to give myself over to
I understand that, Andy. I do understand, darling. I really do. Okay. So the thing is, I think it's totally valid that the Buddhist approach is to listen, to think about it, attempt to find some logic to it. Because in one sense, you could say if there's no logic to it, then it can't be real. So, of course, now to find the logic in something, you have to have some kind of method. You have to have a methodology. I mean, you can't just look at acupuncture and find the logic to it, but by applying allopathic system. They're different systems. So it's got to be an internal logic, which means to understand this concept you just said, first you want to understand what the mind is, and you have to take Buddha's view of what the mind is. So that has to be your hypothesis. The mind is this continuity of consciousness. It's, thoughts and feelings and emotions. Then you have to have the view of karma as your hypothesis, that whatever you think and do and say, produces results in you. Then you have to have the concept of what a Buddha is. You have to know what that means. So a Buddha is a word used to refer to a consciousness that has perfected itself, that has rid itself of all the delusions and developed to perfection all the goodness. And you have to have this, again, as your hypothesis, know that that's a possibility within this system. So then you have to know at the tantric level, there are countless different aspects of Buddha. There's Tara and Chenrezig and Manjushri, millions of different forms of the Buddha that are manifesting in different forms throughout the universe to be a benefit to sentient beings. So all of these are the components of this system that you have to use as your basis in order to understand how it can be that there can be a being called Tara who can benefit sentient beings. Otherwise, it's just blind belief. And then you just get confused. And as you said, you fall into the trap of blindly believing. But if there's not logic to it, I find this very powerful, that the Buddhist view is, because you see, this is the crucial point, I think, Andy. I mean, I was brought up a Catholic too. So the difference in Buddhism is that there is no concept of a creator. As you know well, there's no concept of a creator. That's completely not viable for the Buddha. But if we did have the view of creator, then it is correct to have faith and to have faith in God. And I'm not criticizing that. It can be very powerful, I'm not criticizing that. And that you can't, by definition, you won't be able to prove that God is right. If you can prove that God is right, then you're God, and that you can't say that. So faith is crucial, and I don't criticize that. Now, in the Buddha's view, they also talk about faith, as you know, but the Buddha says there's no concept of creator. So then you have to ask the question, where does all this information come from? I always quote this, that one time in New Zealand years ago, this fellow said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? And then I answered, and of course everybody laughed. I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed relativity to him? And of course, nobody, and including the Buddha. Nobody. Every word in Buddhism, all the way from the sutra to the tantric teachings, are coming from the direct experience of the beings who have seen and proven this, just like relativity is. So then if that's true, if it's coming from a direct experience of a person, then all the methodology has to be there. And then it's a question of slowly delving into it and going one step at a time and proving it to ourselves. But even more powerful than that, before we prove it to ourselves, and this is the same with relativity, or 1 + 1 is 2. And this is what I think is all important, Buddhism is a worldview, it's a system. It's a worldview, and if it's a system and it's a worldview, and it has to be coherent. First, it has to be coherent theoretically. So if it is if it's not, like, if acupuncture is valid, it has to be first proven theoretically before you even stick a needle in anybody. It's not a question of cross your fingers and stick a needle in and hope for the best. It's not, which is how we think of religion, like it's mystical. But the whole of Buddhism, all the way from the sutra to the most complex tantric teachings, they're all basically part of this world view. And if you have confidence that there's someone like the Dalai Lama and some people who are said to be the bosses who've done this work, that can be very powerful to have faith in them. If you don't know anything about medicine, but you've heard about some really good doctor, you can, by checking on their reputation, by checking on their students and their patients, you can have faith in that doctor because you are confident based on your own research that they are valid. All of that plays a role in this, you know. So it's not as if only faith, and it's not as if it's only theory, only intellectual. It's a combination of both. Are you kind of with me, Andy?
Yes, very much so. I think, you know, the idea of a working hypothesis,
Yes.
and then the examples you give, I don't know, I can't see the theory of relativity. I don't know how the human body works medically in the ways that doctors do, but
Right,
I go
exactly.
to them. I take those, yes. Thank
That's
you.
nothing. And like, we know both of those systems are there for us to work on and to prove if we want to. But to have confidence in somebody without having to prove it, that's completely valid. So when I can say, you know, yeah, for sure. And I think for myself, just personally, having come from being a Catholic, and I was very devoted to God. I loved God. I loved Our Lady. I loved the saints. I never much thought about Jesus, but I loved the concept of God, you know. I went to mass every day as a kid. I was naughty, but I also loved God. So for me, that was a very powerful, the devotional part was very enriching. So I know when I got to Tibetan Buddhism, both the logical aspect and the devotional aspect together, for me, I find very, very potent. I find we've got a human heart, and we need, and this is the concept of the guru. I mean, just if you look at the Dalai Lama, just to see there's a person in human form who seems to embody the very words we're trying to prove to be true, that's very encouraging, you know. So, and we're human beings, Andy. We need our little hearts to be kind of open. So I think that the concept of having a person in front of me who embodies those qualities, who's showing me that that's how I can become. I mean, that's not new to us. If you want to become a tennis player, you can't just learn it in a book. You've got to find a Roger Federer. You've got to find your Roger Federer guru whose very presence inspires you. We need that aspect, you know. But we use our intelligence. It's not just kind of emotional. Pabalka Rimba says, choose your guru very carefully. Because you're going to end up like them. So you use your intelligence, you use your noggin, but we've got a human heart as well. I think the combination of these two I find very satisfying. You understand, Andy?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Hello, Lorraine. Hello, sweetheart.
Hello, Venerable. I'm having difficulty trying to phrase this one because I have experienced the emptiness. I completely accepted that I do not exist from my own side. I'm having a little bit of an issue, though, with trying to figure out karmically, if there is no I, what is accumulating karma?
This is the thing about when emptiness emptiness of an inherent I doesn't contradict the existence of an interdependent I, Lorraine, and they're the two things to put together. There's Lorraine having no intrinsic nature doesn't contradict that there's a Lorraine. As Lama Zopa says, when we realize emptiness, it's as if there's no Lorraine, but there is a Lorraine, but what does exist is so subtle, it's as if she doesn't exist. It's just a way of putting it. So we're talking about conventional reality Lorraine and ultimate reality Lorraine. We have to put these two together. So it needs a lot of study.
Do you have any recommendations for reading on that?
Oh, endless, darling. Masses of teachings, constant. Lama Zopa never stops teaching. If you look onto lamayeshi.com, endless teachings of Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe on emptiness. There's endless teachings everywhere. Dalai Lama, there's so much. Just look up teachings on emptiness by the Dalai Lama, teachings on emptiness by Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa. There's so much available, darling.
All right, thank you.
All right, sweetheart. Yes, Samia, talk to me, sweetheart. Hello. Happy to see you, darling.
Lovely to see you and join with you this morning. When you were talking, what came to mind, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, when you were saying about, you know, what Buddha's enlightenment and, you know, it's I'll just get to the point. It made me think of that the Buddha's enlightenment and Mara's temptation, and the
Yes.
Buddha touching the ground and saying, you know, the earth bears witness to
Mm.
this, and
Yes.
the other mudra of prajna and wisdom, and that whole sort of, you know, you who are nobly born, not in the sense of like a prince, but
No,
like
that's
that
right.
quality that
Yes.
we have intrinsically. And
Yes.
that came to mind as you were talking, and I'm just wondering your thoughts around that in terms of what we've been talking about.
Well, the only
Like,
thing I
is
can
that,
think, go on.
yeah,
Go on.
just that thing of the mirror of you know, our lama or teacher, and becoming more like that, and that's that ancestral connection to that, you know, the earth bearing witness. I guess as an Indigenous person, I think of that as a really strong metaphor.
No, that I heard that for you when you said that. That's right. Because somebody's in Australia at the moment. She's in the Saturday. She's a Monday morning. Yeah, she's Monday morning, 12 noon. So yeah, I mean, what to say about that? I think what you. I'm echoing here. I think what you said is very nice. I'm going to leave it there. You said something very nice there. I don't need to say anything about it. It was lovely what you said. Leave it right there, darling. Maybe we should end on that because it's time to go. It's 1 hour. Unless there's somebody else who wants to ask me something or say something. That was very nice what you said, darling. No, that was it. All right, sweethearts, that's 1 hour. Food for thought, 1 little hour, 60 minutes. So that's how many seconds that is. I don't know, 6 to 36. How many, whatever it is. Every thought counts. Everything we thought, it will drop seeds in our mind. So be happy with that and know we can nourish these seeds from this moment forward, continue to practice, continue to work on ourselves, this work in progress, to never give up on ourselves so that we can be of benefit to others as well. That's the main point, darlings. Much love. Jangchub Semchog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchig, Ke Panyampa Mepa Yang Gong Ne Gondu Pelbashog. And maybe never develop, even for a moment, wrong views towards the deeds of our most precious gurus, our most marvelous examples out there, the mirrors of our potential. And may their full inspiration flow into our hearts. Because I think that's a really major point, actually. I mean, the devotion one in Buddhism is huge. And I think that's the part for me, like I said before, as a Catholic, with respect to my upbringing. I know when I went to school, you're not supposed to ask questions. Certainly back then, when I was at school, and I mean, you just had to have faith. But for me, the most nourishing part of from my personally, the Tibetan Buddhist, is the emphasis on learning, and it's up to me to do it, but nourishing that learning with the heart. We've all got hearts, you know, we're human beings with a heart. So I think to nourish our hearts, but to choose people carefully, because there's a lot of peanuts out there, a lot of rubbish. So don't be superstitious. Really check people's qualities carefully. Check their students, check their qualities, check their behavior, check their reputation, and then you can be nourished by that person. This is very powerful. I mean, for me, I find that such a powerful approach, you know. Thank you, sweethearts, so much. Much love.
Thank you
See you
so
next week.
much.